Yearly exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Back to our big story for today, which is to look at the push for more political spending as more political parties are pushing for more government spending. For some countries, they're experiencing their political year. And that's why IMF has come up with this caution to ensure that countries they exhibit what we call fiscal discipline. There was a survey that was done by IMF considering the political landscape in about 65 advanced and emerging market countries, where it was discovered that the push for more government spending is prevalent, while the narrative for fiscal discipline is becoming unpopular. That will be the thrust of our conversation now. And joining us for this conversation, we have the international expert and a global affairs analyst, also a financial analyst. We're being joined by Muktar Mohammed. Glad to have you join us this morning. Good to see you again, and how are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Always a pleasure to be on your program, Femi.
It's really very engaging and also educating having you to join us on Early Exchange. So let's set the ball rolling. Now, a survey was done by IMF looking at 65 advanced and emerging market countries, where it was observed that since 1960, the disposition towards higher government spending is favorable compared to what you call fiscal discipline. Can you give us a picture of what could be fueling this kind of narrative, this kind of behavior, where even political parties are even pushing for more government spending in the midst of, debt, in the midst of physical financial pressure? Now, there's that disposition globally for higher government spending, which brings the conversation to the cost of governance. Can you give us a background to this and what could be fueling this kind of practice globally?
Well, I think the background always has to be the United States of America when you look at their spending in terms of government, in terms of spending by the government. So a lot of countries just do what I call, they copy those narratives from the United States of America. But what they always forget is that United States of America is the one that has the global currency. So they can decide to print more of that anytime they want. And they have a lot of trade agreement with a lot of these nations. And they are on their own part. When they do that to see how they can build more infrastructure, open up new areas for their citizens, looking at new research, looking at new development, trying to come up with new technology. So that involves high government spending. If you leave it to the private sector, they may not have the or within to spend. And if you look at the United States, when it comes to military hardware and military software, the first place to stay by is with the government. And I think that's why American spending is more or less on military intelligence, military gathering, and now they've added to it artificial intelligence for security, and that's what they're doing. But when you look at other countries, mostly African countries, the reason behind some of those expenditure has to do with political decision. To have put more money in the hands of politicians or make politicians more popular because of the project they have brought to their community. So it's depending on which side of the device or which side of the country. You're talking about developed nation, you're talking about developing nation. If you talk about developed nation, most of government spending going to key infrastructure. So they pay a lot in terms of expansion of infrastructure, building a safety net for their citizens, especially when they are little crisis. But when you come to the developed economy, most of those spendings are showed in a lot of corruption, are shown in a lot of nepotism, are shown in a lot of favoritism, and shown also in a lot of prestige for whoever is whoever is in government at that time to say, okay, you know what, when I was in government, this is what I did, this is what I did, this is what is not driven by national cohesion, national development, and national security and national prosperity.
So now that the IMF is advising for a strategic fiscal policy for countries, given the fact that debt sustainability for many countries at this point is really not something that some countries have, what is going to be the position of countries? You've talked about why some countries go into high spending. It could be for infrastructure, it could be for security. Now, looking at developing countries, which should have higher spending because the people tend to need more of government interventions, but there is spending that doesn't is not actually seen in the welfare and the standard of living of the people. What change can we see in that?
Well, the first thing you have to see is if you have a common vision and a common goal of what you want to drive as a nation. What you see in developing economies, especially African countries, what I call, I've said it in your program, copy and paste. They're doing it, how can we do yes, rather than looking at their own internal arrangement. How can we make it better? How can we make it secure? How can we prosper our people? Is this project meaningful? Yeah, give an example. In some African countries, let me give Nigeria as an example. You have an airport in Lagos, and you're trying to build an airport in Ogun State, and you don't even have the network of road to move. If I decide, if maybe let me say Ogun State is cheaper, like what you see in other developed nations. But in other developed nations, if you are going to a place like, let me give an example, you're going to Atlanta. Atlanta is a large hub. So if you are flying from Atlanta to Houston, the cost of airfare is a little bit cheaper because of the large network of inflow of aircraft into that place. But when you're traveling from a place like Atlanta to South Carolina, then you realize that the population of the people are small. You have a smaller airport, so it's more expensive. But again, they have good road network. So those are part of the things that you look when you are trying to build infrastructure, when you're talking about physical discipline. But what we see, we don't see physical discipline. We see where we could, like I said, still want to build an airport. And even the airport in Lagos, we've not even finished using it, like I always say. They are not building one gigantic airport in Ogun State. And you expect me to land in Ogun State. Now, come to Lagos. What is the incentive for me to land in Ogun State? For me to take a car flow to Lagos? What is the cost? The high cost of transportation and everything that's coming up. So what the government of some of these developed nations should begin to look at is to look at projects that are meaningful, projects that are lasting, projects that are productive, projects that are going to create employment for the people, projects that is going to outlive them, projects that can be improved upon. You're talking about housing. How are we not seeing that in successive government trying to bring houses, then open up new places to get people there, giving them tax incentive to be in those places, discongesting the urban area or discongesting the center of the urban area, like Lagos now. You see a lot of congestion is happening in the mainland now. They open up the Lekki as it, you are going towards Ekpe. Those are the type of development you should be seeing, and those are the type of, when it comes to them, then government should begin to concentrate on infrastructure in those places, and that will also create revenue, create employment opportunity for government, and also earn revenue for government also. So I think the bottom line is really knowing what is your common goal, what are you driving at, why do you want this project, is it meaningful, is it for political reasons? Because all we've seen in most of the developing economies, especially in Africa, most projects are located for political reasons rather than economic benefits.
All right, interesting narrative there. Now, let's make a case for countries that are dealing with global crisis, security crisis. You have Ukraine, you have Russia, you have Israel, and the likes of them. Now, you're also aware of the role of the United States when it comes to maintaining peace in these countries at the level of investment worth billions of dollars when it comes to equipment and the rest of them. Now that IMF is coming up with this narrative, the need to have what you call fiscal discipline, how possible, how realistic is this for countries that are battling with political crisis, battling with security crisis like Ukraine and the rest of them, and the impact of that on the rest of the world? So how easy it is for a country like US, who is committed to supporting Ukraine as regards this war, providing weapon and support, to also exhibit what we call fiscal discipline in the wake of these responsibilities that has to do with security issues?
Well, security, they say threat of security, somewhere is a threat to security everywhere. I think that's what the US is looking at. And we're talking about the intervention in Ukraine. You know the history of why the intervention has to come. It's a fight for supremacy. It's a fight for global control. I mean, when you talk about the control, not allowing Russia and especially Putin to have a go. Now, when you look at that war strategically, what you see the US do is You talk about fiscal disciplines. Most of those weapons that are being supplied to these countries are not made, they are made in US and they are paid for by the US government to whoever are the manufacturers. Sometimes they are even paid to the Ministry of Defense that have those research that are doing all those things. So it tends to help the economy going forward, comparable to the other country, because some of these weapons that they take to these countries are not weapons that generally they are using at the moment. They are weapons that sometimes these weapons are not weapons they're using, but now they are growing that sector, the defense sector in America. Defense sector in America is one of the largest, one of the biggest cash cow of the American economy because of in terms of arm production to various countries, not just the American economy. So when they are intervening in a situation, they are looking at the economic importance of intervening there. What the intervention will make is not that they're intervening in the area of cash. Those cash are being, those liquidity also are being invested in those companies in their own country, growing their own country. So it's more or less like you are intervening in a particular country, but again, the economic effect on your country is sound. Because you see here say, oh, we are giving 2 point something billion aid. They don't take their money out of the US. They invest it in the US economy by a US company that's going to supply those arm and ammunition to Ukraine for that. So the challenge is normally like the Russia and the Ukraine now is on Ukraine, because after this war, if the war comes to an end, then they begin to deal with infrastructural development, and the same United States will come. Oh, they will have to build the infrastructure from Ukraine. They will bring in a US company to Ukraine. You build the infrastructure, and the fund is not going to come into Ukraine directly. It still remains in the US because it will be the bringing of a US company. So their own strategy is different. So they maintain physical discipline by improving liquidity in their system and by growing the local economy. But when you look at other countries, mostly developed countries, the only way they try to maintain physical discipline is to attract investments. And sometimes these investments are attracted into this country at a higher rate comparable to if they are left in their country. So by the time you see this now, you see that the developing economy are struggling to meet up, especially the exchange rate volatility, because that is why they want to see other countries come in to own their economy. But when you talk about the United States, they are thinking of how to own other people's economy, starting from their own, in their investment in their own company, expanding to some of these countries. So that is just the challenge. Why? But it's very difficult sometimes for other developing economy, developing economy to be able to maintain fiscal discipline because they depend so much on the developed economy.
So for an economy to be developed, let's look at this in the way economies are run by governments. Some governments will rather do more spending, others will spend less and maybe even increase taxes and all. So which of them seem to be a better way to encourage development? In some countries, they don't even look at, the government believes more in a market-oriented economy, allowing the private sector run the affairs or just determine what happens in the economy. Which of them would you say leads to development faster and easier?
Well, it depends. It depends on the crisis that you are as a government at a particular time. If you are in a crisis that has to deal with recession, then you may have to also think of spending your way out of recession. Let me give an example. If you in America, at a point when they deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, they injected a lot of liquidity through direct intervention to household, which means has to do with social investment. So it depending on which side some economy have to spend their way out of their crisis, and some economy have to invest their way out of their crisis, and some economy have to attract companies into their economy and give them tax rebate for their economy to strive and stabilize. So now, before now, the whole idea of tax has to do with government revenue, but it has improved upon now that the Commonwealth from whereby tax is not just about government revenue, it's about coming in, having that tax holiday, growing your economy, help the economy grow, then in the long run, you still pay those taxes, but tax is now a means to grow the economy. So you attract big player into your economy by giving them tax rebate, comparable to before, whereby tax is all about revenue. Now, tax is not being used to grow the economy rather than just about revenue. So that is one area. Then if you look at, like I say, you may have to spend your way if you are going through a crisis. A given example, I still give Nigeria as an example. What is the cause of Nigerian crisis? Is the lack of infrastructure. So how do you pave your way? You may have to begin to think of building infrastructures. And how do you build infrastructures? Then you begin to look at which company can build those infrastructure for you. Are they locally driven or foreign driven? If they are foreign driven, do you have the capacity to maintain in terms of exchange rate volatility? If they are local driven, do they have the manpower and the capacity to give you a good job? So you, in between that, you come up with a concept that will work for you. But to other economies like the United States, whenever they have crisis of recession, they have crisis like we have COVID pandemic, because their currency is so strong, they will afford to spend their way out of those recession. And how do they spend their way out of those recession? They begin to look at social nets and then begin to give people subsidy in one area or the other to create stability for a certain period. Then before you begin to see everything normalize. So it depends on the crisis a particular economy is facing at a particular time, determine this kind of strategy they will use to get out of it.
All right, Muktar, I would still like you to shed light on this idea of fiscal discipline expected of countries, in the wake of, severe public debt, which most countries are battling with now. Now, for some of these countries, especially the developing countries, what should be the narrative when it comes to fiscal discipline? What should be the starting point? First of all, I would like you to establish what is the norm or the ideal when it comes to fiscal discipline. And what kind of template would you expect these countries to adopt, most importantly for developing countries, or perhaps just separate the template for established or advanced economies versus that of developing economies when it comes to fiscal discipline? And then how can they ensure that this is done in a way that is also drive the narrative about the cost of governance? There's always been advocate for cutting the cost of governance to also ensure fiscal discipline. How will these interplay in your own perspective?
First of all, let's talk what is fiscal discipline. Fiscal discipline is all about management of your resources. That's fiscal discipline. When we're talking about fiscal discipline, we are talking about how do you manage your liquidity, how do you manage your gains, how do you manage your income by your expenditure. So that is what fiscal discipline is. So what are you allocating to a particular sector? Is it politically allocated, or is it for economic gain? I'm talking about the developing economy. Even if they do it in the developed economy also, there are some project that goes because of the political gain. Now, for developed economy to maintain fiscal discipline, you must make sure that your revenue is more than your expenditure, and your expenditure is going into capital expenditure rather than recurrent expenditure. But what we see in developing economies is that we see a lot of recurrent expenditure taking a large chunk of their resources, and now they have added another form of recurrent expenditure, which is debt. Before now, recurrent expenditure have to do with allowances, have to do with salary, but now most countries now recurrent expenditure now is debt, because the more service debt have now become a recurrent expenditure. So what you see is that once your revenue is not able to pay your debt, your revenue is not able to meet your recurrent expenditure. So what you have is that a lot of your revenue goes to recurrent expenditure. There is no provision for capital expenditure, which has to do with projects, which have to do with create jobs for your people, which build infrastructure for them to grow their business. So what you see when there's no physical discipline, then the first place that you see the suffering is in terms of infrastructural decay, because there are not a lot of there's no fund available for them to tackle this area. So what is the strategy that most developed economies have decided to do, developing economies have decided to do, is to do what we call the PPP, build public-private partnership, whereby the private sector build and operate for a particular year. Then after that numbers of years, those projects are given back to the government, and throughout these numbers of years, these companies are also going to pay tax. Remember, I say how you use tax to grow your economy. Those are the strategies that are being adopted these days. PPP, public-private partnership. Now, that is how you can begin to look at fiscal discipline in the area that what you spend is less than what you earn. But if what you spend is more than what you earn, then you are going to the debt trap. That is why you see a lot of developing countries are in a serious debt trap because of lack of fiscal discipline in the area of recurrent expenditure. Now, if you look at developed economy, what they do is that a lot of their expenditure, a lot goes to capital development, capital infrastructure development also, and human capital development. So that's where they allocate most of their funds to, and then that build up their revenue because they intend to export a lot of those products outside the shore of their country to also build up revenue. And they do a lot of trade with most of these countries that depend on their own currency for stability. So you can see that is the difference between the developed economy and the developing economy and the developed economy. It's all about fiscal discipline, and fiscal discipline has to do with expenditure, and expenditure has to do with what are you spending, what management. So once you go to look at all developed economy, the challenge that they have is that recurrent expenditure is always more than capital expenditure.
Now, moving away from recurrent expenditure, trying to move away from recurrent expenditure, what the IMF actually advises is for countries to move into investments that are long-term, or investments that have long-term sustainability, and also consider areas such as climate change mitigation, digitalization, and other areas that could help grow the economy. Let's even take a look at climate change mitigation, for instance. So it seemed like IMF is not actually asking countries to stop spending or have a spending cut, but is saying move your spending to areas that have better economic benefit. If developing countries, for instance, are to move into or to invest in climate change mitigation and digitalization, what prospect does it hold for the economy?
Listen, so it will be difficult because, again, when you talk about climate change, and for you to address climate change in developed economy, developing economy, then you have to go to the rural area. And for you to be able to address those changes in the rural area, then you have to build infrastructure buffer for them. Because again, then if you're going to build those buffer for them, let me give you rural area now. Most of them still use firewood, which is determined to the climate. But do you give them cheap energy? Do they have a cheap energy? Do they have gas? Or are they renewable energy? What is the cost of that? So it's a big challenge for most developed economy to maintain that climate change issue, because those in the rural area will need to be provided for them to leave their old method of letting them know that it affects their climate. But if it's affecting their climate, fine, they want to change. But if it's also affecting their livelihood, then it will not see the light of day. So what we would expect that the IMF and others should do for developing economy is to intervene and invest in the area of climate change by renewable energy and making those energy cheap for them. That is the only way that you'll be able to address climate change in developed economy, because almost 60 to 70% of the indigents in developed economy are living almost outside the main city, and this main city lack adequate resources for them to be able to address the climate change issue. So it's about addressing climate change then, but most of these countries cannot address this climate change on their own without support from an organization like the IMF World Bank and other international donors because of the amount that is involved in it and the fact that most of these people are living in the rural areas.
Now let's address the public lifestyle of political class and also office holders, most importantly in Africa. Of course, a global practice where you see presidents, governors in large convoy, fleet of cars, big allowances, huge state budget, which is far becoming a practice. Now, what is the influence of these when it comes to government spending? You're aware that conservative policies always advocate for small state budgets and lean allowances. But here in Africa, if you look at what is playing in Africa and by extension Nigeria, you have huge state budgets running to trillions of naira and even dollars. But let's address the lifestyle of the political class and political office holders. How much of influence has that had on the issue of government spending? And how do we correct the narrative in a place or in a country where people are used to this kind of practice?
You say, Femi, you said the rating. People are used to this kind of practice. That is it, because of political gain. It's all about political gain. Government has now become a social investment. So you help a government come to power, then you must be given a political appointment, because government now is about social investment, political investment. So you see, of recent, I think it's one of the state governors, in those states, was about 300 and something political appointees. And so there was a time that when Rocha Okorocha also was governor of Imo State, he did the same thing, bringing up a lot of political appointees. But most of these political appointees, if you look at what is done in most of these developing countries, like Africa, is towards relevance in the rural area to be able to get their vote when it's time. And if you look at this, most of these things always happen in the first year, towards the end of their first year tenure in most of these countries, because they are thinking of having a second term. And so they try to make people look, because government has now become a wheel for life, for individuals to improve their life. Definitely, government is supposed to be a wheel for everybody to improve their life. But now it's not coming that individuals see government as the only way that they can improve their life. So that is the major challenge. And it's a political challenge. And when it comes to political challenge, before that can be addressed, unless you have a leader that have strong political will to be able to do that. Yeah, I like saying it, like, if you look at Nigeria as a country and you look at the office of the president, you look at the media team of the president, why do you have senior advisor and senior special advisor when the job is all about managing the media team for the president? Why do you have the advisor on social media? Why do you have so many appointees that could be done by one person, being the presidential spokesman, getting individuals to manage some of these things rather than creating a portfolio for them? So that, for me, is the major challenge. It's a political challenge. And as it stands now, most African countries, I don't think, are ready to live that way governance, because that way of governance for them is about the future, their future relevance. How can they be futurely relevant in the scheme of affairs? Then they need to have people that will stay in there when they are out of there. And the only way they can get this is to use resources that are meant for development, for the empowerment of those people, rather than empowering those people to be able to be productive and help their own economy. So for me, that is the challenge. But it will take a leader with strong political will to be able to address this major challenge. And like you say, it's a global practice. Most companies, you see them, they do what they do. But again, you need to look at their income and expenditure. You need to look at the life of the average citizen of that country. You need to look at their inflationary pressure. You need to look at their housing needs. You realize that some of these countries don't have it so much like what you have in these developing economies.
All right, as a follow-up to that, let's also look at this angle to that development where political class are under financial pressure, due to demands from the electorate, maybe people from their constituency demanding for projects. And in a climate where money politics is prevalent, politicians are expected to spend money for a lot of things, for empowerment. Even in some instances, you buy jam forms and do registration for people, you buy food and all sort of things. how easy it is for them to be prudent in the wake of this practice, and how do we correct this kind of narrative, even though you've acknowledged that it could be a global practice, but in this kind of situation where it's also affecting government spending, how do we check this practice?
Very, it's difficult. Again, like I say, government has become a social investment. People look at government and an escape route out of poverty. So, because of the lifestyle of government officials, especially in developed economy, how do we do that? I still repeat myself. We need to have leaders that have the political will to do the right thing, despite whoever. Because what we see is that some of them will say, "Oh, I help you to come to power. I spend my resources to bring you to power. Then I need to get back those resources. And the only way I can get those resources back is for you to give me an appointment in government. It's for you to give my own people, my own company, using some of my colleagues to get some of this job in government." That for me is the greatest challenge. So say this, say that, is it all still have to deal with political will. Do you have the political will? Do you have the support of the people? Did you really win that election? Was it the people that were behind you, or it was by rigging? It's by the way you said to some of these people? Then in terms, since after election, you have to give them something to do, and when they are helping you, their main reason for helping you is because they feel that by helping you, they will be giving appointments. So it's a huge challenge for the political class, and then for the citizens to be able to say, okay, this is my political, or don't just give me fish, teach me how to fish. But most time, because the political class in most of these countries has weaponized poverty, and so the average citizen does not see beyond the now rather than in the future. That is the greatest challenge, because poverty has been weaponized. Poverty has been used as a tool to keep the people where they are by giving them what will not drive, what will not make meaning in their future.
So when the people are poor and the economy is not growing, there are different things that could be done. So fiscal policy is one of the ways to actually rejig the economy. But some countries do not even have the revenue to make some, to back up some fiscal policy. And so they are going towards spending cuts, increasing taxes. What kind of situation does that create when there is need for spending, but the resources to back it up is absent, and the people are already
Oh,
impoverished?
that's why you see they go cap in hand borrowing, putting the people more into debt, because they need to satisfy the need of the people. Because for a long time, the people have been neglected. So that is the challenge. The challenge is not a short-term solution to a long-term problem that has been there all the time. So what you need to see a rejig in policy, and then a synergy between the monetary and the physical side. In a country like Nigeria, where most of the informal sector that has last chunk of the business people in this country is starved of liquidity by the monetary committee, either through reduction of supply of liquidity in the system or hiking of rate, it kills that sector of the economy. So what you see is, as long as the physical and the monetary side are not on the same page with the people, then you continue to have those challenges. So how do you address it? You begin to look at the peculiarity of your own economy. How can you bring physical discipline by improving the life of the people, rather than, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this, we don't have the money, but we have to do it by month. But you are not doing it because of the people. You are doing it sometimes because of the benefit that it will accrue to you politically. So that for me is the major challenge in most developed economy. And we've not said one word today, I've not mentioned, but when I talk of challenge in developing economy, I'm talking about a monster called corruption. Even when sometimes money allocated for this project, they are either done shabbily or they are not done at all, and there's no accountability. Nobody's going after them to say you completed that job, because whoever giving it to them is it must have told them the template, and sometimes you realize that these people have the job is supposed to be like 100 million naira, and they said, okay, you have to pay You have to give us 20 million out of it. And so what you see is that they tend to be fall back because they have to pay that 20 million. And so by the time they pay the 20 million, they don't even have enough money to continue the project. So corruption also play a major role. And so to deal with that, you need to look at the system. You need to make the system work without people. And that's what we're talking about, building structures. And those structures are not short-term structures, are not a strong man structure, that are structure that can be internally driven even when you are not there. That for me is the solution to some of the problems that we have, either physically or monetarily with developing economies of the world.
All right, may I point your attention to this advisory from IMF? I would like to quote IMF, and I would love you to listen and react to it. Now, the quote: our latest fiscal monitor calls for governments to avoid slippages and focus more on rebuilding financial buffers and safeguarding fiscal sustainability over the medium term. There are two words there that I would like you to react to: slippages and rebuilding financial buffers, which over as stipulated by IMF, medium term. Now, for countries who are battling with the issue of debt and also high government spending, what kind of slippages do you think they should avoid, or pitfalls they should avoid? Then when you talk about financial buffer that could help them recover, or like immunity against this kind of spending or the aftermath of the spending, can you shed more light on that? As a financial expert, what kind of buffer would you expect these countries to put in place in order to survive, or if not immune against the effect of high government spending?
The answer is very, very simple. Reduce your recurrent expenditure. High political appointees, reduce the number. Try to invest in the productive sector of your economy. So it's very simple. And when you are trying to create an economic buffer for your country, then you have to improve upon your goods that you export out of the country, and then build your reserve. You can only build your reserve based on the type of group that the goods that are attracting international payment from you. And I'm not just talking about just crude oil. No, I'm talking about you have to look at the generality of your economy in terms of those buffers. So it's very easy for you to get engaged, reduce recurrent expenditure, especially high cost of governance. Why do you have to have 6 special advisors, 7 special advisors? Some of them even have as high as 30 special advisors. They have a commissioner, then you still have special advisor, you have a president, you still have a lot of special advisor on security, you have a special advisor on power, and you still have minister for power. So all these are conflicting. So for them to be that, first of all, you reduce the cost of governance, especially in the area of political appointee. To build financial buffer for your people, they must be investing in the creative sector, whereby most of these things are exported out of the country, and the country earn FX and build their reserve. The only way you can build financial buffer is to build your reserve, because if you look at developed countries, why the challenge is immediately the exchange rate of their currency and that of the dollar begin to rise astronomically, it becomes a problem for them. So, but if you have a buffet, like what happened to Nigeria during the global economic crisis during President Olusegun Obasanjo, there was a buffet that was being built by the reduction of debt from the Paris Club and also the high cost of oil revenue. And so how the finance minister at that time was able to manage those revenue to put them in savings for the rainy days. So that is just the best way to do. Reduce your current expenditure, improve in building up your liquidity, especially in the area of your foreign reserve.
We're talking about what government can do. What about the people? What is your role in this? What is the role of the people in spending, in higher spendings? Earlier we talked about political parties across board mostly being in favor of higher government spending. Is it a strategy sometimes to win elections when they promise higher spending?
Well, that's a strategy. Especially I think with this word I'm about to use became popular during Ayodele's time as governor of Ekiti State. He talk about he talk about so much infrastructure. This is not about physical infrastructure. It has to do with stomach infrastructure. And like I said, the political class have weaponized poverty. And so most of them not even seeing the future. The people are not looking at the future. And this is because of lack of education. And so the key to reduce all these challenges that this country has is build an educational institution to be able to teach everybody what it means to be a citizen of a country. What is your contribution? It was JF Kennedy that said, you think not of what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. But you know, in Nigeria, they will say, what has government even done for me to even be thinking of government? So the mindset has to shift, and the people have to hold their political appointees accountable, not just because he gives you 20,000 today, give you 15,000. You are not able to tell him that why is that project that was supposed to be meaningful, why did it stop? Is it because of lack of funding? How do we help? Do we contact the authority? Those are part of the things that the people need to be doing. They need to be holding their political appointees accountable. They need to be involved. They need to know who their political appointees are, how many bills he provided, if it's in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, how much project has he been able to do, not corruptly, but directly through intervening for some of those are part of the things that the people need to ask. So what do you ask me? I say the people need to begin to ask their representatives, why is this? Why is this? Why is it not like this? Why are we still? So by the time you begin to ask questions, that means that they will know that the non-political crowds are more educated than before, and they will hold them accountable. Then they will sit up.
All right, let's look at this side to this conversation as well. The role of political parties. In Nigeria, we practice what you call multiple, party system. Unlike in the past when we used to have two parties, you used to have NRC, SDP, but now you have more parties. How is this also influencing government spending or the spending on the part of the political parties, where you have more candidates? Even for INEC or the electoral body, means more spend. You have to spend more money on ballot boxes, to entertain the candidacy of these political parties. There are those who are advocating for Nigeria to return to a two-party system in order to curb government spending and even have a unified kind of legislature where it's also easier to cut the number of representatives for Nigeria. How easy it is for Nigeria in the wake of this mounting financial pressure? Do you think it will be expedient to look into these directions?
It will not be expedient for me because the political class will not want that. Because that's what you see. It's only in Nigeria if somebody tells you, give his complimentary card, and you look at complimentary and say, I'm a politician. It's not doing anything. Politics is not it's not a career. So, but a lot of these people just do all those things. So, I think for me, I think we need to the need for the political parties. They don't have ideology, Femi. In Nigeria, they tell you that PDP, APC, ABGAB, Labour Party, they are all the same. And if you look at it, some of the people that in Labour Party were one time in PDP or they went time in APC, when it doesn't work out for them, when they are no more popular there, then they look for the next. So it's just the way it is because of there's no ideology, there's no there's no sincere drive to build a company that to build a political party that is based on ideology, not a political party that accepts every comma that comes in. Oh yes, it's a family affair. No, and then the political party also that have their own particular manifestos, whereby the government in power, if we see is PDP is in power, the people should know what's expected. Like in America, when the Republican is in power, they know what is expected. When it's Democrat in power, they know what is expected. So until we begin to build that ideology, whereby a particular party goes to power, we know this is where we'll be putting money to. It's not that today is in APC, tomorrow you have to come to PDP, and then we continue to celebrate that same person. So for me, that is the challenge.
So let's take a trip to America now, since you mentioned America in your comments while talking. This is the election period in the US, and the candidates have been talking about what they would do and talking about what they would not do. So, but one issue that is of concern to Americans is the debt issue, the rise in debt or the high debt of the US and how that's going to be managed. And the US is a country where the government have always been doing high spending. They have a credit system that a lot of citizens are quite used to. Given the IMF's advice and the upcoming election, what area do you think that whoever emerges will be moving towards in terms of spending in the US?
Like I said, when you look at every political party there, you know where they're spending, they will spend more. If a Republican comes into power, you know they will spend more in terms of in the area of defense. And so they will want to build more defense buffer, especially now that they have internal security threat and then global security threat. When the Republican comes to power, then you see that they will invest more into healthcare and then and the people in terms of interventions through direct cash supply. So those are what is expected. Now, how do they balance this with their debt? Like debt in itself is not a bad issue. And that's why America is the world most indebted country at this moment. And but again, when you are looking at debt, you have to look at not just your debt to your GDP. Also, like Nigeria will tell you the debt to GDP is okay. What about is you don't use GDP to pay your debt, you use revenue to pay your debt. If you look at the American economy, why they don't struggle is because there's a lot of revenue that can pay off all the debt at when they are due, because a lot of their companies are doing where they are exporting outside the shore of this country, of their country. So they are any more effects and their currency happen to be a global currency. So they don't have challenge with most of all the things that we here will have challenge with. So it has to do also with what is your trade volume with other part of the of the world. That is the main key driver of some of this. So for America, we expect that we already know what to expect when the Republican Donald Trump win or Democratic Kamala Harris wins. We know what is expected. We know Kamala Harris have talked about putting more money on the hands of the people economically. That if you have 4 children, then government will see how they can be subsidizing the last side. If you look at Donald Trump, he has mentioned more towards reducing the inflow of immigrants into the economy of America, so that more of the what they call the indigenous American will have more jobs. So all these are clear-cut policies that they are talking about, and these are policies that they will definitely put through all their heart in to achieve. Or when you talk about African politics, when we go for campaign, we don't see those political statements. Rather, we go there to dance and dance and dance, then we come back. There's nothing anybody's taking away from that. And the next time we are voting for those people. So those are the challenges. So it's a different type of challenge for both the developed economy and the developing economy.
All right. So before we let you go, having talked about what obtains in one economy is different from what obtains in the other, particularly if one is developed and the other is not developed. Now, there are times when statistics or even reports are released by the IMF or the World Bank, and sometimes it seems like it's not a reflection of what happens or the reality on the ground, even when the NBS in Nigeria, the National Bureau of Statistics, sometimes release result like, oh, inflation is at this, and sometimes people feel, oh, this is not a reality, and the federal government looking at the methodology in arriving at results for inflation. What's your thoughts on it? Should we have our own, or should we come up with something that is quite, it actually almost equals the real status or the real state of things? What are your thoughts on that as we wrap up?
I've said it some time ago. IMF is not in Damaturu. IMF is not in Sokoto. IMF doesn't know what happened in Sokoto. So that's why I always say that when you bring in IMF policies, then you need to look at your internal policy to, with this policy, drive more people to prosperity or poverty. We have looked at IMF policy globally, especially to develop economy. There's virtually any developing economy that has come out of the wood through the intervention of IMF or World Bank, because their policies are not tailor-made for that. But like, give an example of Nigeria. when IMF is talking about high tax payment, is talking about increase in electricity tariff. Those are not things that will help the people, but the people earning ability is very, very low. So why you don't see those results from IMF? Because that's not the reality on ground. They don't know the reality on ground. I tell people that there's a difference between textbook economy and the real economy, where you see you need to rejig your strategy and then see how you can create more wealth and prosperity for your people. So why we don't see those results? Because IMF policies are not internally driven. They are a global template that, India used it, look at where they are, China used it, but they are not looking at the precarity and the culture of those people. So that is the major challenge. The same thing you talk about Nigerian bureaucracy. Sometimes when you see those numbers, you say, where did they get their figure from? So that's another issue. Where are they getting their figure from? Are they getting in the street of Abuja? Or somebody just sit down and say, this is what I think is obtainable now. So those are data management. What is their template in terms of gathering data management? With that, then you begin to know whether what they are saying is free or not. So it boils down to what we started before: physical discipline, and then also management. Management is key. How are you managing your resources? How are you allocating resources to the people? What kind of policy are you driving? Are you driving a World Bank policy that is largely driven by textbook economy, or are you driving an indigenous policy that you rejig to take your people out of the wood? So that is the challenge.
To react quickly to it as we wrap up, today MPC meeting is taking place, starting today. What's your expectation? Quickly.
My expectation in one word: hopefully the MPC should cut rate, because we've seen them. If, like I said, if we have been doing the copy and paste that we've been doing with other economy of the world, no, so economy now cutting rate. So if you ask me, MPC, maybe we'll get the first rate cut in Nigeria for a very long time. That's my expectation.
All right, I'm turning you to a prophet now and to a seer. Let's see if your prophecy will come to pass. But whatever it is, we must thank you, Muktar Mohammed, for spending time with us on LXing this morning. Always a pleasure having you around to shed more light on issues like this. Thank you so much for creating time on a busy Monday morning to join us on this program.
My pleasure, Femi. Thank you, Blessing. Thank you, Femi. Always a delight to be on your show. Thank you for having me. You have a pleasant week.
And you too.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.